you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who take on my hate. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Naruto Enters Lord of the Rings. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Leaf Ranger on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The village of Konohagakure no Sato. It had been 8 years since the infamous Kyuubi no Kitsune had attacked this shinobi village. 8 years since the Yondaime hokage gave his life to seal the beast inside the body of a newborn baby. The village had rebuilt and their numbers replenished. But old wounds heal hard, and many searched for an outlet for their sorrow and rage at lost ones. They found this outlet in the now young boy. The Sandaime sighed as he walked through the streets of Konoha. The old member of the Sarutobi clan looked around at the cold stares and ignorant looks people were sending. Not at him, but the young, 7-year-old boy next to him. The young boy looked around nervously. Sarutobi shook his head. The boy was a spitting image of his father. The spiky blonde hair, the blue eyes, the wide grin that occasionally appeared on the young boy's face. All of it exactly like the Yondaime. He wanted him seen as a hero. And yet, the Sandaime looked at the 4-man ANBU escort moving almost invisibly along the rooftops. They can't see past the fact that Kyuubi is in Naruto. Not that he is Kyuubi. Naruto Uzumaki, orphan of Konoha, fidgeted with the white t-shirt he wore, with a red spiral on the front and back. He also wore a pair of somewhat loose black kid pants and shinobi sandals. The boy once again timidly looked around at the glares he was receiving. Why do they look at me like that? What did I do? He thought to himself. At least it was better than when he was in the orphanage. There, the adults had cursed him, punished him for no reason, and whenever one of the other kids bullied him, nobody came to his aid. He looked over at the one of the 3 people who seemed to like him. Ojii-san, where are we going again? Sarutobi Hiruzen smiled at the young boy. We're going to register you at the Ninja Academy. After all, if you're going to be Hokage one day, you need to be a ninja first. Naruto nodded excitedly. After he met the Sandaime and found out who he was, he had declared that he wanted to be Hokage. Many people just laughed or sneered at him, but not the old man. He just smiled and said he would help him as best as he could. They arrived outside of a large, 3-story building, with a sign at the gate identifying it as the academy. Sarutobi escorted the now hyperactive Naruto inside. The receptionist greeted the Sandaime, but her eyes hardened when she saw Naruto. He backed up until Sarutobi stopped him with a hand. The old man looked at the woman with a killer intent lace glare. Is there a problem here? The old shinobi asked simply. The receptionist quickly shook her head. And no problem, Hokage same. What can I do for you? Sarutobi gently pushed Naruto forward. I'm here to register Naruto Uzumaki for the academy, and I expect you won't have any problems. Yes. The receptionist quickly nodded as she pulled out the necessary paperwork. The old Hokage began filling it out, grumbling about paperwork. If only the fools on the council were as easy to deal with as this woman was, the old man thought. The council had moved to block all attempts at giving Naruto a normal life. They prevented anyone from adopting him. They had made sure when he left the orphanage that all the shopkeepers knew to overcharge him or refuse him service at all. And Sarutobi was unable to do anything, as Naruto was a civilian until he graduated the academy. He finished filling out the paperwork and returned it to the woman, who nodded and handed a new piece of paper to Sarutobi. This is his classroom. His teachers will be Uruka Yumino and Mizuki Taoji. Sarutobi nodded. Uruka had lost his parents to the Kyuubi, but he would hopefully put those fears aside and train Naruto as any other student. Mizuki was different. He was a skilled chunin who should be in jounin, except for his belief in the mission first, comrades second. Sarutobi turned to Naruto. Now that you're set here, let's go get some lunch. How does ramen sound? Naruto jumped up excitedly. You mean from that Ikaraku place? All right. He jumped in the air before practically dragging the Sandaime out of there. The old man smiled at the young boy's enthusiasm. Just like his old man, they arrived at the ramen shop, where Naruto excitedly greeted the other 2 people who were nice to him. Tuchai-san, I am Ni-chan, the man who ran the ramen shop, and his 14-year-old daughter both greeted their #1 customer. Naruto, how are you doing? The old man grinned as he prepared to cook a whole mess of ramen. Great, I'm going to be in the academy soon. the boy shouted as the hokage joined him. Really? That's so cool, Ayame said as she held up a notepad. Now, what can we get you to? I'll take 3 miso, 3 beef, 3 pork, and 3 chicken. And I'll have 1 of miso, the old man said, laying money out on the counter for the ramen. Within minutes, the first of Naruto's order was up, and he was gulping it down, while Sarutobi just shook his head in amusement. A started on his own bowl of ramen, and slowly slurped it down, savoring the meal. As they ate, Sarutobi turned to Naruto. I never did ask. Why do you want to be Hokage? Naruto smiled up at the old man. So that everyone will respect me, just like they respect you, Ojii-san. Sarutobi looked back at his bowl of ramen. You know, Naruto, the role of Hokage is not just so you can have respect. There is much you have to do, and be willing to do. As Naruto looked at him in confusion, the Sandaime explained. Being Hokage means you have to be willing to make tough decisions. Choices that may send people to their deaths. And if the time comes, you may have to give up your own life for the village and its people, just like the Yondaime did. Naruto looked down at his 7th bowl of ramen. I didn't know about that, he whispered. For a second, Sarutobi feared he had broken the boy's dream. Then Naruto suddenly looked up, his little face set and determined. Then I'll protect this village. Even if I don't get to be Hokage, I'll protect this village like I was. Then everyone will see me and respect me. Sarutobi nodded. Spoken like a true shinobi of Konoha. You keep that determination and train hard. And someday, you will be Hokage. Naruto nodded as he finished slurping down his 6 remaining bowls of ramen. Then he patted his slightly bulging belly and burped. Excuse me. Sarutobi, Ayame, and Tuchai all just chuckled. Sarutobi thanked the 2 ramen cooks and he and Naruto left. Sarutobi escorted Naruto back to his apartment, which Sarutobi had gotten him a year earlier. Outside of it, Sarutobi stopped Naruto and slowly pulled something out of his Hokage robe. Naruto, I have something for you. It was your father's. He slowly held out his hand, which had a ring in it. The ring was silver, with 2 snakes on it with emerald eyes. In between the snakes was a crown of golden flowers. One snake looked like it was holding the crow up, while the other looked like it was devouring it. Naruto looked at the ring, then up at the Sandaime. This was my dad's. But then, you know who he was. Sarutobi looked away for a moment. I do. He was a great man, Naruto. I can't tell you who he is, not yet. When you are older, I will tell you. But for now, take this ring, and know that both he and your mother loved you. Naruto nodded, and slowly reached out. But as he touched the ring, he suddenly felt a tingle in his arm. Inside a giant cage, held shut by a single piece of paper with the kanji for seal on it, a figure stirred, and one red eye with a slitted pupil open. The time is coming. All over the elemental nations, 8 other beings felt the same tingle in them. And in those 8 people, 8 beings of great power felt the stir of the winds of change. The world was about to change. 2 years later, in a small port town in Wind Country, a strange ship slowly entered the harbor. The ship was beautifully crafted, with smooth lines. The prow curled up into what appeared to be a swan's head, and the stern was curled up as well. A single mast with a sail provided propulsion for the ship, even though it looked like the ship could almost fly. As the ship docked, a gangplank was set over the side, and 2 figures descended from the ship. One was an old man, wearing a pure white cloak, which matched his hair and beard. Underneath, he wore a robe of the same color and material. One hand clutched a staff of what looked like white metal, but was in fact wood. At his side was a straight-bladed sword, with a curved hilt guard. He calmly surveyed the dock, with eyes that seemed to speak of great knowledge. The other figure also wore a cloak, but this cloak was a dull green, and he had it closed. The cloak's hood was pulled over his head, throwing his eyes into shadow. You could see the lower part of his face, which suggested the figure was a boy, a teenager of about 16 years of age. The cloak ended about mid-calf and showed a pair of leather cloth boots. On his back, over the cloak, was a quiver and a longbow of unknown design. The boy was also surveying the dock. The old man spoke first. This land has indeed changed. We must be careful, as we do not know what will antagonize the people here. The second figure nodded. Indeed, we need to find out where we are, and then proceed to the place Iluvetter told you about. This, Konoha. The old man smiled at his young companion. Patience, Elroth. We will find Huon, and the one who will be the savior of Middle-earth. All in good time. With that, the 2 proceeded to the end of the dock, while the ship slowly pulled away, and left, just as mysteriously as it had come. Konoha, 2 weeks later. Naruto sighed as he sat through the lecture Iruka was giving on the history of Konoha. It was good to know the past of your home, but how was that going to help fight off an enemy ninja? Bore them to death with the economic crisis during the Nidaime's time as Hokage. At least Mizuki-sensei taught useful stuff all the time. Naruto fingered the ring he wore on a chain around his neck. His father's ring was too big to wear around his finger, so he kept it on a chain. As he touched it, he remembered the strange thing that had happened after it was given to him by the old man. He glanced around the room. There it was again, that faint aura which surrounded everyone. At first, he thought it was chakra, but then he had seen this aura around civilians as well, who couldn't use it. And chakra was in the body, not around it. He glanced around the room again. As always, the aura was incredibly faint around every one of the students, and even Iruka-sensei. There were only two where it was strong. One was a girl, Hinata Hyuga from the Hyuga clan. Naruto had noticed that all the Hyugas seemed to have a stronger aura than others, but Hinata's was the strongest by far. He looked over at her. She was slightly blushing, her lavender, pupilless eyes fixed on the paper she was using to take notes. She was always shy and timid, but especially around Naruto. Her whole face would blush red, she would stammer and push her index fingers together. Naruto just thought she had a fever all the time, which explained why she fainted a lot too. He thought she was weird, especially since she wore that heavy beige coat with fur, even in the summer. But around her, he could see an aura pulsating, almost like a living being surrounding her. It felt warm, gentle, almost inviting. The other person was him. The team, Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto hated him, and at the same time, respected him. Sasuke was the best at everything. He was a better ninja, he was always acting so cool, and he had all the girls. Naruto looked Sasuke over. Ever since the Uchiha massacre 1 year back, Sasuke had become silent and brooding. His black eyes were always cold and indifferent. He had switched his long black sleeved shirt for a blue short-sleeved shirt with the Uchiha fan emblem on the back of it. He still wore his white shorts, but now had a pair of white arm warmers on. Naruto snickered as he caught sight of Sasuke's hair. That was the one thing he didn't envy. Sasuke's hairstyle, which made it look like a chicken's butt had been attached to his head. But that snicker died away as he saw the aura around Sasuke. It was smaller than Hinata's, and it was darker too. It had been dark before, but since the death of his clan, it had grown darker still. Naruto shook his head and turned his attention back to Iruka. He sighed, and this time, his mind wandered to how he was going to convince his crush to go have ramen with him. Sakura Haruno was cute, in his opinion. She had long pink hair, green eyes, and was incredible smart. He had a huge crush on her, but she only had eyes for Sasuke. Another reason why Naruto hated Sasuke. Suddenly, the last bell for the academy day ended. Before he could even get to her though, Sakura had already leapt up and was following Sasuke, along with almost every girl in the class. Darn, Naruto muttered as he looked away and gathered his stuff together. He turned in time to see Hinata still there. He thought for a moment that she had been looking at him. But no, she was just blushing as she quickly left. Naruto sighed as he picked his bag up. He left the academy, keeping his head down as he passed a bunch of kids being picked up by their parents. Because he had his head down, he didn't see the person he ran into. He fell back with a yelp. "Sorry, I didn't mean to. I wasn't looking," he said as he rubbed the back of his head. "It is quite all right, young one." Naruto looked up to see a kindly old man with long white hair and a beard. A cloaked and hooded figure next to him helped Naruto up. The old man smiled as he moved back. "What is this place?" "Oh, this is the Ninja Academy. Here, we train to be ninjas, and I'm going to be the greatest so I can protect everyone." Indeed, a lofty goal for one so young. Naruto looked at him with a confused look. "Huh?" The old man just smiled. "Never mind. Do you know where we can get something to eat? We don't have much money to spend on food." Naruto smiled widely. "I know the perfect place. Come on." He led them away to his favorite eating place. "So, what are your names?" "I'm Naruto Uzumaki." The old man and cloaked figure glanced at each other, and the old man nodded. He smiled at the boy. "I am Gandalf the White, and I am Elroth, son of Eärendil." Naruto looked at them. "Wow, interesting names," Naruto said as he led them into the Ikaraku stand. Gandalf and Elroth both looked over the various flavors listed on the menu before sitting down. Aion greeted them all. "Hello, Naruto Naisan. Who are your friends? I am Gandalf, and this is Elroth." The hooded figure lowered his hood, revealing blue eyes and a mass of brown hair which was worn shoulder length. It was mostly straight, but slightly untidy here and there. He nodded his head at Aion, who blushed slightly. Elroth smiled at her as he opened his cloak. It revealed a fine leather jerkin over a shirt of chainmail, which sat over a long-sleeved shirt. A pair of hardened leather bracers covered his forearms and were etched with emblems of unknown design and origin. A pendant, shaped like a leaf, hung around his neck. On his right side, a foot-long hilt of a sword similar to Gandalf's was revealed, wrapped in black cloth and leather. The hilt of a knife shone on his left side. Naruto ordered his usual 12 bowls, while both Gandalf and Elroth looked at him in amusement and amazement. Gandalf leaned over to Elroth. He has a hearty appetite. It reminds me of the dwarves when I traveled with them. Naruto smiled happily as he gulped down his ramen, while Gandalf and Elroth simply enjoyed theirs. Elroth stiffened slightly and turned his head enough that in his peripherals he noticed a figure hiding. But from their stance, it seemed they were merely watching. And the figure seemed to be watching the blonde boy they were with. He turned to Gandalf to tell him what he saw, when something else caught his eye. The ring that hung on the chain around Naruto's neck. He pointed it out to Gandalf, who saw it and nodded. He is the one, Gandalf whispered to Elroth before turning back to Naruto. Tell me, my young friend, do you happen to know where we might find the leader of your village here? Naruto nodded as he finished his 10th bowl. Yeah, it's Oji-san, old man Hokage. Why do you want to know? Well, we actually might have need of his village services. Could you maybe show us to him? Naruto nodded. Okay, now, Naruto wasn't that much of an idiot. He knew that there were those who would want to hurt the Hokage, like ninjas from another village. But in his book, anyone who bought him ramen was good. Besides, when he first saw them, he sensed that strange aura around them. And their auras were incredibly strong, yet warm, and inviting like that Hinata girls. Naruto felt he could trust them. When they were done, Naruto led them towards the Hokage's tower. Both Gandalf and Elroth stared again in awe at the mountain behind the tower where 4 faces of stone were set. They had seen the monument when they first entered the village. In all my years traveling this land, I never thought I would see something like that. The dwarves might have been able to accomplish this, but men's skills were never this advanced. Elroth nodded. It is truly inspiring. He slowly glanced around. Judging from the old maps, I would say this was once the region of Gondor. We are probably somewhere in the woods of Ithilien. Yes, which means that the heirloom of the line of Numenor lies near. They both stopped talking as Hei approached the tower. Naruto led them as far as the desk of the Hokage's secretary. There, they were stopped as the secretary glared at Naruto. What are you doing here? She said, with venom in her voice. Naruto was about to retort when Gandalf placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked over the secretary. This young boy was showing us to your leader, the Hokage. We have a proposition that could give your village a great deal of money if you let us speak with him. Gandalf said calmly. The woman's eyes widened, and she quickly went to the door to the Hokage's office. Hiruzen Sarutobi was giggling perversely as he read an orange book when a knock at the door disturbed his reading. He quickly hid the book before saying, "Who is it?" The secretary opened the door. "There are some people who wish to talk business with you, Hokage-sama." She moved aside as Naruto led Gandalf and Elroth into the room. The secretary left as Gandalf and Elroth bowed to the Hokage. Naruto simply smiled. "Hey, Oji-san, these guys wanted to talk to you. Said they had business." "Really? Well, first, welcome to Konoha. I am Hiruzen Sarutobi, Sandaime Hokage of Konoha." Gandalf nodded. "I am honored to meet you, Lord Hokage. You have a beautiful village." The Sandaime smiled. "Yes, it is. Now, what business do you have?" Gandalf sat down in one of the chairs present. "Simple. I have come seeking a certain someone, one who wears the ring of Barahir. The one who is of the line of Numenor, and contains a great being of power within him." Sarutobi stiffened at the last thing Gandalf said. "Indeed. And you expect to find this person in Konoha?" "Not find. Found." Gandalf pointed to Naruto, who looked at him in confusion. "Huh? What do you mean?" Gandalf reached over and gently touched the ring hanging from Naruto's neck. "This is what I mean. This is the ring of Barahir. It was worn by those who were of the line of Numenor, the High Kings of Gondor, long ago." Sarutobi looked at Gandalf, his suspicion high. "What is it you want exactly?" Gandalf sighed. "For you to truly understand, we must begin from an earlier point. Many years ago, in a land across the oceans from this one, a great evil managed to escape from his prison. He fled here, where he once caused great destruction and evil, but he was weak and unable to take physical form. We sent great hunting beasts to track this evil down." Gandalf shifted in his seat before continuing. "There were 9 of them. They were mighty beings, stronger than any mortal. Each took the form of an animal, and their tails indicated their power. I believe you both know of what I speak of." Sarutobi understood in an instant. "The Biju," he whispered. Gandalf nodded. "Indeed. To you, they were beings of destruction and evil, but in truth, they were the ones hunting this evil. But we watched from afar as one by one they were captured, until only the leader remained. The great Huon, or as you all refer to him, the Kyuubi." "Yes." Naruto looked at Gandalf in confusion. "But we read about that. The Kyuubi attacked Konoha and the Yondaime killed him." "No, Huon was not killed. No mortal could kill them, for their power came from Iluvatar himself, or as you refer to him, Kami. Naruto looked at the Sandaime in confusion. Oji-san, what is he talking about? The Sandaime sighed as he looked up at Gandalf. It is a close-kept secret. What this man says is true. The Kyuubi couldn't be killed. Instead, the Yondaime sacrificed his life to seal the Kyuubi. Sealed into what? Wouldn't it be dangerous to seal him in something? Gandalf indicated his head at Naruto. You should tell him. He deserves to know. Sarutobi looked at Naruto. I wasn't going to tell you until your 16th birthday. But the situation has forced my hand. Naruto, the Yondaime couldn't seal the Kyuubi in an object, as it would shatter and set him free. He had to seal it in a person, and not into an adult, as their chakra coils would shatter and the person would die. He had to seal the Kyuubi in a newborn baby so as to let the chakra coils adjust to the new power. In that moment, Naruto realized the truth. A newborn baby, and his birthday was October 10th, same day as the Kyuubi attack. He gently touched his stomach where he had seen the strange seal, but had thought it was a tattoo or birthmark. It was me, wasn't it? He sealed Kyuubi in me. Sarutobi nodded sadly. Gandalf knelt next to the boy. Do not be afraid of this. As I said, Huon is not an evil creature. He attacked Konoha because there was clues here leading to one he was sent to hunt. He made a grave mistake, young one. But he is not evil, and even if he was, you are not him, but simply a jailer. Naruto stared down at the floor. Eventually, he looked back up at the Sandaime. That's why they all hate me, isn't it? The Sandaime came over and hugged Naruto. Yes, but they are all fools. Do not worry about it, Naruto. Gandalf nodded. Indeed. Do not let this worry you, as it can be of great gain to you as well. Naruto looked up at him. How does this help me? Gandalf smiled, before muttering a few words in a language neither the Sandaime or Naruto understood. Suddenly, his staff pulsed, and fire began to burn around the end of it. Naruto and Sarutobi looked at it in awe. Gandalf stopped his spell, as he said, with Huon in you, his power has seeped into your body. Tell me, can you sense an aura around others? Naruto nodded slowly. Yes, around you and Elroth, it's sharp and clear. Gandalf nodded. Good. When you touch the ring of Barahir, it awakened the power within. You, Naruto, can use magic. Naruto looked at Gandalf. Magic? Yes. To be precise, you can call upon the ancient spirits dwelling throughout the land and call them to your aid. This is why I am here. I wish to take Naruto and train him to use magic, among other things. Sarutobi looked at him in surprise and suspicion. Take him? Where? Across the land. I wish to show him many things and train him to use this power. It will greatly help him in what I fear may come. What will come? This evil you spoke of. Gandalf nodded. Yes, this evil, known as Morgoth, is slowly gaining power. He has enlisted evil men to his cause, and may eventually raise an army which will sweep across this land and destroy all in their path. Even though men now wield greater power than before, you cannot stand before his, should he become strong enough. But if Naruto is trained to harness this power, he can stop Morgoth. He can save us all. Sarutobi shook his head. Why should I believe any of this? Admittedly, you have interesting powers. But how can I trust you? Gandalf shook his head. I cannot force you. All I ask is that you do, for the sake of this land and all who live in it. Sarutobi was about to object when Naruto stopped him. Oji-san, I believe him, and I want to go. The Sandaime looked at Naruto in surprise. Naruto. The boy looked up at the Sandaime, his face set and determined. If what Gandalf says is true, if I can learn this power, I will. If not to protect the world, then at least I will be strong enough to protect this village. Sarutobi sighed as he knelt down next to Naruto. This could be a trap. Naruto nodded. I know, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. Sarutobi sighed. It will take a few days to try and clear this up with the council, and then I can't guarantee they will let him leave. Elroth reached into his pocket and pulled out several beautiful jewels. What if it was a mission? We could pay to have Naruto come with us. The Sandaime gasped at the sight of the jewels. It was the equivalence of a small fortune, more than any mission was worth. He looked up at them. For how long will you train him? Gandalf looked at Elroth thoughtfully. It could take years. I need to train him to be able to call upon and use his new power, and Elroth will wish to train him in his own skills. It could take 5 to 10 years to cover the basics. Sarutobi shook his head. That's too long. But I may have an idea. Naruto, you told me you can't perform regular clones, yes. Naruto shook his head. No, I can't. Then here is something else. With this, we can shorten the time considerably. Sarutobi went over to a cabinet along the wall. As he did, Elroth looked around to see 4 pictures hanging on the wall. Each showed a different person, but it was the 4th picture that caught his eye. "Who is this?" he said as he looked at the picture of a blonde man. The Sandaime turned away from the cabinet, with a large scroll he had removed from the secret compartment in the back of it. "That is the Yondaime Hokage, the one who sealed Kyuan in Naruto. And was he Naruto's father?" Everyone froze at Elroth's question. The Sandaime sighed as he set the scroll on his desk. "You two seem to be nothing but trouble," he said. Then he looked at Naruto, whose eyes were wide and his face in shock. "Naruto, I told you that your father and mother loved you. Yes, the Yondaime Minato Namikaze was your father. Believe me, Naruto, the last thing he wanted was to do what he did to you." Naruto slowly nodded before fainting on the spot. The Sandaime sighed before opening the scroll and copying one section of information on it. He then performed a jutsu, and the paper became blank. He returned the forbidden scroll to its hiding place and gathered several more scrolls from the cabinet. Then he went over to a wall and revealed a hidden safe. He opened it and pulled out a scroll with a seal on it. He turned to Gandalf and handed all the scrolls and the blank paper. "When you have left the village, give these to him. The blank paper and the sealed scroll need a drop of his blood to be revealed or opened. I suggest he read the scroll first, then the blank paper, before he begins any training whatsoever." Gandalf accepted all the scrolls and handed them to Elroth, who placed them in a pack he carried. The Sandaime sighed as he looked at Naruto's still form. "I wanted to wait till he was older, when I thought he could handle all this information." Gandalf nodded. "You wish to protect him, but the longer you prolong the truth, the harder it is to deal and cope with it." The Sandaime nodded before returning to his desk. "The jutsu I got from the scroll is called the Shadow Clone Jutsu. It is a useful ability as it creates clones who can fight, and in Naruto's case train. All the information he needs is on that paper. I expect you back in 2 years so he can finish the last year of the academy." Gandalf nodded. "If this jutsu does what you say it will, then we will be back." The Sandaime nodded as he summoned one of his ANBU guards. "Take Naruto back to his home. Wait till he wakes P, then bring him back to me." The ANBU nodded and picked Naruto up before disappearing. Gandalf and Elroth headed to the door. Gandalf turned before he left. "We will be camped outside the village. Please see him to the west gate for your village tomorrow morning." With that, Gandalf left with Elroth. Sarutobi sat down at his desk. "I am way too old for this shit," he said before pulling out a bottle of sake and downing it. "Now I know why Tsunade drinks so much." The following morning, Sarutobi, with a huge hangover, stood near the west gate. Naruto stood next to him, a pack on his back packed with everything he needed and wanted to take with him. He was silent, lost deep in thought about what he had learned yesterday. His mind was still overwhelmed by all he learned. He didn't even notice when Gandalf approached until Sarutobi nudged him. He looked up, his eyes mostly blank. Sarutobi kneeled in front of Naruto. "Naruto, I'm sorry about everything. I was afraid of how you might handle the truth if you knew. Please forgive me." Naruto slowly shook his head and gave Sarutobi a sad smile. "It's okay, Oji-san. It's just so much to take in at once. It might be a while before I'm able to accept all of it." Sarutobi nodded. He slowly stood up and watched Naruto move towards Gandalf. "Naruto, I'll see you in 2 years." Naruto turned and smiled as he waved. He stopped as he took one last look at the village before turning to face the new adventures that lay ahead of him. Gandalf led Naruto deeper into the woods until they came to a campsite. There, Elroth sat next to a fire, a long curved pipe in his hands. He looked up at the two and nodded before looking back into the flames of the fire. Naruto placed his pack on the ground and sat next to the fire, trying to dispel the morning chill still over him. He just stared at his hands as he held them near the fire. Elroth looked questioningly at Gandalf, who sighed. The boy is still in shock over yesterday. It may be some time before he fully grasps that which has been told to him. And then, who knows how long until he can come to terms with it. Elroth shook his head. He should have been told from the start. If someone had exposed these secrets to him in a battle, he would have froze up and been killed or captured. "I can hear both of you," Naruto said softly, still staring at his hands and the flames beyond. Gandalf slowly sat next to Naruto. "Forgive me, Naruto, I know you have much to think about, but if we are to begin your training, there are 3 things we must do first. Do you understand?" Naruto looked up at Gandalf and slowly nodded. Gandalf smiled. "Good. Now, first, you need to read the scroll from your father, Elroth." The scroll was quickly produced and handed to Naruto. "Your Hokage said you need to add your blood to that seal in order to open it." Naruto stared at it for a moment, then slowly bit his thumb and spread a little blood on the seal. It disappeared and the scroll opened. Gandalf moved away as Naruto began reading his father's last and only words to him. Dear Sachai, if you are reading this, then one of three things has happened. You have learned about Kyuubi being sealed in you, you are 16, or you are a jounin. And if you are reading this, then I succeeded in doing something that I hope you can someday forgive me for. Sachai, I know that despite my wishes, you will probably have suffered. That some would have seen you as nothing more than Kyuubi. Believe me, if I could, I would gladly seal the Kyuubi in myself or anything else. But what hokage would I be if I didn't protect my village? And what kind of man would I be if I asked someone else to sacrifice their child, when I myself am not willing to make the sacrifice? I know that this does not ease your pain. But know this, there is also no one else who I would trust more to grow up containing the Kyuubi's power. Even though you were only a newborn at the time I wrote this, I could see the strength in you. You are a hero, Naruto. By now, you are probably wondering about your mother. I'm sorry, Sachai, but she died at childbirth. But I will at least tell you about her. Her name was Kushina Uzumaki. She was a beautiful woman, and at the same time, one of the most dangerous. She was a ANBU ranked jounin of Uzugakure no Sato. I met her during the Third Great Shinobi War, when me and my genin squad rescued her ANBU unit from an ambush of Iwa Shinobi. After that, we became friends, and eventually, we fell in love. Shortly afterwards, Uzu fell to Iwa. She managed to reach Konoha and sought refuge. I gave it to her, and more. We married, and she eventually became pregnant with you. I was so happy, I shouted the news from the top of Hokage Mountain. It was perhaps one of the greatest moments of my life, and your mother never looked more radiant that day. Well, you know the rest. I cannot ask for your forgiveness, and I do not blame you if you don't. But know that I am truly sorry for what I was forced to do. All I ask is this: do not let the foolishness of others determine your life. The only people whose opinions truly matter are those who get to know you for who you really are. Remember that, my Sachai. I must go now, as the Kyuubi is drawing close. Goodbye. Love, Minato Namikaze. P.S. The seals at the bottom of this scroll contain things which I know you will want to have, or will help you in the future. And if you should see an old man with long, spiky white hair, and is peeping on woman, remind him of his debt to me. I think you will be surprised. Naruto stared at the letter, rereading it many times. He didn't even notice the tears streaming down his face. He looked at the bottom and saw several seals with different kanjis in the center of them. He reached to one marked memories. Almost as soon as he touched it, there was a poof OS smoke, and a photo album appeared on his lap. He looked at it, then slowly opened it. In it were photos of his dad and mom with their parents. He was amazed at the sight of a young yandere, who looked exactly like him, without the whisker marks. His mom had straight red hair, which was long, and green eyes. He flipped through the pages, watching as his parents grew older and became ninja. His father wearing a chunin vest. His mom with an ANBU mask in her hand. His dad with 2 boys and a girl. His genin squad. Then, the pictures seemed to merge. Now, his mom was tall and beautiful, standing next to a full-grown Minato. They were both smiling, eating ramen together at a stand. Them walking together, hand in hand, kissing under a full moon, and then them at their wedding. His father with a huge smile, as he held his mom, who was smiling and crying at the same time. Then he reached the last photo in the book. His father hugging his mom, whose hands were on her huge belly. Then, the photos ended. Naruto looked at the blank pages. That's where they would have put photos of all of us. He closed the book, and then looked at the seal. He gently reached out, and as before, the seal poofed when he touched it. The book returned to the seal. He slowly rolled the scroll back up, and slid it into his pack. Gandalf and Elroth had watched as Naruto's emotions had changed as he read the scroll, and looked through the book. Now, he looked up at the two, and some of the light was in his eyes. He smiled at them, though it was a small version of the smile they had seen before, and it was still laced with sadness. Well, what else do we need to do? Gandalf came over to Naruto and indicated he should move away from the fire. Now, I must contact Huin, and in order to do that, you need to show me this seal. Naruto nodded, and slowly pulled his shirt up enough to expose the seal. Gandalf looked at it with interest. Remarkable. Men have indeed come a ways since I was last here. Now, this might hurt a little, but in the end, it will be well worth. Gandalf placed the head of his staff against the seal, and began muttering words in a language that Naruto didn't recognize. Then a burning sensation swept across him, and he blacked out. Mindscape. Naruto found himself in a dark place, which looked like a prison. The walls and floor were metal, and pipes that leaked water onto the damp floor ran along the ceiling. Naruto looked around. Where am I? Within your mind, my young friend. Naruto turned to see Gandalf striding towards him. The wizard swept his staff along the hallway. I've heard of these places from a few elves who managed to reach such a stillness of mind that they could enter and organize their own thoughts. It appears you can do this with little effort. But for now, come. We have a friend to find. With that, Gandalf led Naruto through his mind. Naruto noticed that as they walked, the floor became damper and damper until they were walking through puddles of water. Eventually, they reached a huge room. Naruto stopped as he looked around. The room was massive, but barely even lit by a pair of torches sputtering in wall brackets. A huge wall of bars stood on the opposite side of the room, and holding the bars shut was a small piece of paper with the kanji for seal on it. In an instant, Naruto realized where they were. He froze in terror before Gandalf turned and gave him an encouraging smile. Fear not. Remember, Huon is a being in service to Iluvatar, as am I, he will not harm you. Naruto nodded and moved forward. Inside the bars, he could hear a creature breathing deeply as if in sleep. Gandalf stood in front of the bars and raised both his staff and his other hand. Huon, great leader of the FANFICTION, I, Olorin, do call upon you. There was silence, and then the sounds of movement from within the cage. The sounds of heavy paws hitting metal indicated that something approached. Then, a pair of giant red eyes glowed from the darkness. Olorin, you have finally come. Indeed, Huon, I am here to call upon you in this time of need. The eyes moved closer, revealing a giant fox head covered in red fur. The eyes moved to Naruto, who was rooted to the floor in fear. Is this the one, the descendant of Numenor, and the beginning of Ribiger? Gandalf nodded. Yes, he is the one who will aid you in completing your quest. He is Naruto Uzumaki, son of Minato Namikaze. Naruto just slowly held a hand up and slowly, timidly began to wave. Huon looked at him, blinked, then lowered his head. I am honored to make your acquaintance. I am Huon, but if you wish, you may refer to me as the others of this land have. Naruto swallowed. And nice to meet you. Gandalf smiled. Huon, perhaps you should take a smaller form. I believe you are scaring the boy. The fox nodded and began to shrink. Within seconds, he was about the size of a horse. He came to the bars, but stopped. Naruto, before we talk, I must ask for your forgiveness. I wish to apologize for the attack on your village, and what it has probably led to. Naruto, gaining courage at the sight of a smaller Kyuubi, and that he couldn't leave the cage, nodded. Well, I understand that you are actually good guy. But, why? Why did you attack Konoha? What did we do to you? The fox slowly lowered his head. As you've been told, I was leader of a group sent to hunt down a great evil named Morgoth. I eventually found a man, tainted by Morgoth's evil power. This man, I later learned, was Madara Uchiha. Have you heard of him? Naruto slowly nodded. One of the few times he had actually paid attention in class, Iruka had taught them about the founder of the Uchiha clan, who betrayed Konoha and left. Kyuubi continued. Since he was my only lead to my true target, I fought and tracked him for many years. Eventually, he escaped. 9 years ago, I learned that he had descendants in Konoha. In my arrogance and fervor to complete my mission, I attacked Konoha without question. That is why you and so many others have suffered. Because of my blind arrogance. Kyuubi kept his head down in shame. Naruto just stood there. When he finally spoke, it surprised both Gandalf and Kyuubi. So, it was this guy Morgoth's fault, right? They both looked up at him as he continued. Well, it is. If he had just stayed where he was, none of this would have happened, would it? Gandalf smiled in amusement, while Kyuubi looked amazed at the boy. But, I am the one who was just doing what you were supposed to be doing. You made a mistake, and it was a big one. But if you live life in the past, how can you make it anywhere in the future? Naruto said. Gandalf smiled as he patted the boy on the back. You have great wisdom beyond your years. Huon, the boy is right. We need you to help the boy and help me teach him all we can before he must return home. The Kyuubi nodded. Then I will teach him everything I can. I have learned much of this new world, and I will pass it on to you, young one. Naruto's eyes lit up. That's so cool. I can't wait. What are you going to teach me? Some awesome explosion jutsu, or using an element, or how about we start small, work our way up from there, Kyuubi said, with a huge sweat drop on his head. Gandalf looked at it in interest. Remarkable. Anyways, now that you have awakened, you will be able to communicate with the boy. For now, we must leave. In reality, Elroth watched as both Gandalf and Naruto shook their heads, and Gandalf moved back. Naruto pulled his shirt back down. So now what? He asked eagerly. Gandalf smiled as he showed Naruto the blank paper the Sandaime had given him. This, my boy, is the key to you being able to learn everything you need to know in the time we have been given. There is a jutsu on this paper. Just add blood to it, and it will be revealed. Naruto looked at the paper, then at his thumb, which still had blood on it, even though the wound was healed. He quickly swiped the blood across the paper, and writing appeared on it. Naruto eagerly began to read. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Rank: B ranked Kenjutsu. Description: the Shadow Clone Jutsu allows the user to create a solid clone, similar to most elemental-based clones. Unlike regular clones, shadow clones are not illusions, and are capable of independent thought. The jutsu splits the user's chakra amongst the clones, allowing the clones to perform any jutsu the original creator knows. Shadow clones are easily destroyed, usually with one solid hit. When a clone is destroyed, anything they have learned, seen, smelt, or touched is transferred back to the creator. This makes them very useful scouts and support fighters. However, the amount of chakra used in this jutsu is high, which is why this technique is forbidden, as even most jounin are unable to create more than 5 clones at a time. Also, the mental strain of multiple clones dying or being dispelled could lead to severe headaches and unconsciousness. Variations: the Shadow Clone Jutsu can also be used to summon hundreds of shadow clones, known as the Multi-Shadow Clone Jutsu. This isn't a ranked Kenjutsu, as the chakra required is immense and may be more than most jounin, and even some cages have. Naruto, this jutsu is ideal for you, as with your high stamina and chakra capacity, you could create dozens, if not hundreds of clones. These clones can help you train in using a technique or taijutsu stance, practicing chakra control, and reading numerous scrolls and books. However, they cannot help you train physically, so you must do that on your own. Be careful when dispelling them, and do it one at a time, or small groups if you use the hand sleeve for this jutsu. Naruto eagerly read the hand sign and memorized it. Then he got to work. He moved his hands into the special cross-shaped hand sign and shouted, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." With a poof of smoke, a single, very pale and ill-looking clone of Naruto lay on the ground. Naruto sighed in disappointment as the clone poofed away. He tried again, getting the same result. He worked for over 2 hours on the technique, eventually being able to make 1, then 2, and soon 5 clones. Despite the encouragement he was getting from Gandalf, Elroth, and Kyuubi, Naruto became frustrated. He was supposed to be able to create more if what the old man had said was true. He readied the jutsu again, and this time poured a whole mess of chakra in. This time, 20 clones popped up, all of them looking exactly like Naruto and holding his stance. He smiled as he released the hand sign, panting. He got the technique down. He just needed to pour a lot of chakra into it. Gandalf nodded. Impressive. Now, with work, we will be able to teach you much very quickly. The hokage gave us these other scrolls. You should look over them. Naruto smiled as he looked over the scrolls Elroth handed him. One said chakra control on it. Kyuubi perked up. I think you should start on that scroll first. If you can control your chakra, you can create more clones using the same amount or less chakra. Naruto nodded and opened the scroll. He read the scroll and smiled as he memorized the first exercise. Then he moved over to a nearby tree and, remembering what he had learned, summoned 10 clones. They all nodded at each other before channeling chakra into their feet. Then they all proceeded to walk up the tree. Almost immediately, 3 of the Narutos slipped off and fell, but gently landed on the grass. Another made it 2 steps and fell off, dispelling into smoke. The remaining 6 made their way up, falling off one by one, until the last, who was almost a quarter the way up his tree, fell and barely managed to land on his feet. Naruto looked around and saw he had 4 clones left. He created more, and with the knowledge he had gained, adjusted his control. They all headed up, getting farther than previously. But Naruto noticed from the memories of the few that were falling off that they had reached a dangerous height. He turned around and made his way down slowly. Then he turned and watched the clones continue on until the last fell off at about halfway up the tree. He created more clones, and they headed up as he turned and looked over the scrolls. But Gandalf stopped him. It would seem this training method is very effective. I would suggest you and Elroth begin working on physically strengthening your body. Naruto nodded and turned to Elroth, who stood up and removed his quiver, bow, cloak, and his sheathed sword. He looked Naruto over before nodding off to a nearby clearing. The two headed over there while Gandalf watched the clones continue to work. This boy is truly remarkable. Then he began planning on where to start his own training with the boy. The next morning, Naruto groaned as he slowly got out of his sleeping bag. What am I doing? He thought. Yesterday had been a wake-up call in the world of physical training. He thought he had been through a rigorous training in the academy, and what he had done himself. Elroth had blown him away, but Elroth had told him that this training evolved from spending life in the wild, where every day was a life struggle. Still, that didn't help Naruto with the fact that every muscle was sore. he decided to continue his chakra exercise. He smiled as he climbed the tree and stopped at a branch over halfway up. He remembered how one clone had managed to get almost to the top, losing his footing a foot away. He smiled as he went back down and created 13 clones. He looked in surprise as he had intended to make 10 clones and had used the same chakra as yesterday. He dispelled the clones and tried it again with a little less chakra. 10 clones appeared and he set them to work on the tree climbing. Then he turned and sat next to the fire. A smirk crossed his face as he took a long branch from the fire log pile and used it to poke Elroth's still sleeping form. The blanket rolled over, revealing a number of logs put together to look like a person sleeping. Almost immediately, he sensed his clones being destroyed, but couldn't tell what was doing it. He turned and saw Elroth standing on a branch. "This is something else I can teach you, how to be invisible in plain sight." He climbed down and stood next to the tree. "I have noticed that something ninjas are taught is how to be invisible. But most of the time, they leave something behind that a skilled tracker can notice. A broken branch or bark, crushed grass, anything like that, which most ninjas wouldn't notice. Besides the physical training, I will teach you stealth, tracking, swordsmanship, and herb lore. These are the essential skills of the Dunedain, and in this world, they will serve you well." Naruto just stood there, amazed. Then he finally spoke. "How long were you in the tree?" Elroth just stood there, then shook his head. "We have a long way to go." Naruto's life became a blur after that. For the next month, he traveled westward with both Gandalf and Elroth. Each day, in the morning, they would travel, with Elroth moving through the woods, and Naruto had to try and find him. Gandalf was also beginning to teach him the languages of elf and dwarf, saying he would need them. Towards evening, they would make camp, and Naruto and Elroth would train together, while dozens of his clones performed both the tree walking and now the water walking exercise. A number of other clones had begun looking over some of the other scrolls, which contained basics jutsus, as well as some element manipulation jutsus. Naruto quickly found that these were incredibly hard. From the few he was able to begin mastering, he learned that he was pretty good at wind and earth jutsus. Kyuubi was also teaching him a few other jutsus he had seen. He had also insisted Naruto began wearing weights, as he had seen what these weights could do for some ninja. But since they had none, he had taught Naruto a special seal that used chakra to increase weight. Since the weights fed on chakra, it would also help increase his chakra reserves. After a month, the weight seals had slowly grown in their amount until they were about 5 times heavier. All Naruto knew was that during the spars he and Elroth had, he was beginning to be able to keep up with some of Elroth's attacks. He had been given a simple short sword with which to practice. Now, it hung at his side. At the end of the month, they were past Earth County, and in lands that most shinobi and civilians didn't even know exist. Naruto looked at Gandalf curiously. "Where are we going?" "I thought that we were traveling to see things, as you trained me." Gandalf smiled. "We will, my boy. We will. But I wish for you to know much about this world, before this age of ninjas and such. I want you to know about the time when the land was inhabited by elves, dwarves, and many other beings. And, where we are going, you will also be able to learn more about Morgoth, and those who he might be able to call to his aid." Naruto nodded. "And we can learn all that out here." "Indeed. Not far from here is the White Tower. It is an ancient Numenorean structure which once held the Master Palantir. Palantir, an ancient sphere which allows one to view many things and communicate with others at great distance. In fact, I believe your hokage has one of them, although he cannot use it fully. But this tower now holds many artifacts of the Great War once fought between good and evil, as well as a priceless source of information. The Red Book of Westmark." Naruto looked at him. "Really? What is so special about it?" Elroth also looked at Gandalf. He had heard rumors about this book, but nothing substantial. Gandalf brought both of them up to date. "This book is a narrative of the Great War of the Ring. It is a narrative of the finding of the One Ring, and then the quest to destroy it." "Oh, you mean that ring that Sauron guy made, right? To rule over all with." "Indeed. The book is actually 2 books in one. The first was written by Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit who found the One Ring and kept it hidden. Eventually, he passed the ring to his nephew, Frodo Baggins. It was Frodo who destroyed the ring, and by doing so, destroyed Sauron. You will know all of the story, as I will have you read this book, so you will know of what might lie ahead for you." Naruto sighed. "Wouldn't it be easier for you to just tell me?" Gandalf shook his head. "You gain nothing from taking shortcuts. You do not gain experience from reaching the destination, but by traveling the journey." Naruto nodded. "All right then. How long till we reach this tower?" "We are a day or 2 away. The tower is guarded by the Fairbairns, a large family of hobbits, who are descended from one of the great hobbit heroes of the War of the Ring." "You mean there are still some around?" Gandalf nodded. Indeed, it would seem most were driven from their homes by the ninja of Earth Country. But the Fairbairns would not abandon the White Tower. Now come. Kyuubi smiled inside Naruto. I think you will enjoy their company. Hobbits love to eat, drink, and play pranks. You should fit right in with them. Not only that, but they are very good at stealth and throwing weapons, especially knives. They can help you. Naruto smiled as well as he followed Elroth and Gandalf. If what Kyuubi said was true, he should fit right in with them. They traveled throughout the day. But as evening began to set, Elroth stopped and immediately began looking around. He disappeared into the trees. Naruto turned to Gandalf. Where is he going, Gandalf-sensei? Gandalf looked at Naruto. Now is the time to use the training you've been given. Listen, isn't something off? Naruto became silent as he tuned his ears to listen. Then he noticed. The birds are silent. So is the rest of the forest. Exactly. There are several people surrounding us. Be on guard. Naruto nodded and slowly reached down to his sword. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly as they waited. Then a knife entered the clearing, stopping at the pair's feet. That's far enough now. Several berry men exited the tree line. By the looks of their clothes and weapons, one could guess they were bandits. The leader of the group stepped forward. Here on our land, you'll have to pay up to keep going. Gandalf reached for a pouch on his side. And how much will it cost us? All your money, supplies, and the weapons too. And then you all being sold to the nearest slaver. A young boy like that would fetch a fine price, as some people like young slaves. They tend to last longer. Gandalf sighed. I'm afraid that won't do. But I am willing to offer you this. Leave now, and you leave with your lives. The bandits all chuckled. You expect us to believe that? An old man, and a snot-nosed kid, who looks like he barely got out of diapers. Very funny, old man. Gandalf shook his head. You do not know of what you are getting into. I will say this one last time. Leave now. One bandit drew his sword. Let's just kill the old-timer. He's no use alive. He charged forward, his sword raised. Gandalf moved with speed that was impossible for one his age. His staff was blocking the sword, while his own sword, Glamdring, was buried in the bandit's chest. The man looked down, then slowly fell off the sword. The bandits roared and rushed out. Naruto pulled out his own sword, but was very shaky as fear overcame him. One bandit charged at him, his bladed club raised, when an arrow nailed him between the eyes. Another arrow shot out of the woods, and took a second bandit through the throat. Naruto just stood there, until he heard Kyuubi's voice roar at him. Behind you. Naruto turned, and dodged to the right, instincts taking over as a large blade crashed into the ground he had been standing on. The leader smirked at him. You're mine, kid. He charged forward, his sword held high. Naruto ducked under his arms, and came up. The short sword went right into the man's gut. Both Naruto and the leader stood there in shock. The man looked down at the small sword, then looked at Naruto. Damn you, boy, he whispered, before collapsing, taking Naruto down with him. Gandalf twirled his staff in one hand, smashing it against one bandit's head, while he slashed another across the neck and shoulders. Elroth dropped from the tree he was on, his sword in hand. A bandit swung at him, and Elroth dodged to the side, swinging back to take out the man's legs. He turned and grabbed another bandit around the neck. With a powerful twist, the man fell to the ground, dead. One last bandit tried to run, when a rock came out of the trees and bashed him in the back of the head. He fell like the rock that had hit him. From the woods, several figures appeared. They were all small, about Naruto's size in height. They all had curly hair, pants with suspenders, button-down shirts, and no shoes, sandals, or socks. They all also wore vests and coats, and carried short swords at their sides. A couple even had small bows, while most carried knives. The leader of the group slowly approached Elroth and Gandalf. Are you Gandalf, the wizard friend of Frodo Baggins? Gandalf nodded as he cleaned his sword. I am indeed. But there will be time for introductions later. For now, we must leave, and quickly. Elroth moved over to where Naruto was still trapped, and rolled the body off him. He suddenly cursed as he saw the look on Naruto's face. Gandalf, the boy, he's in shock. Gandalf rushed over to Naruto, whose face was frozen in a face of shock and fear. Elroth picked him up as Gandalf cursed. For a boy to be forced to kill at a young age, we must get him somewhere sheltered. Hurry. In Naruto's mind, Naruto sat numbly at the base of a beautiful tree covered in golden leaves. Since he had met Kyuubi and learned the full truth about him, he had decided to give Kyuubi somewhere better to live. With the nine-tailed kitsune's help, he had changed it to a veritable forest, which Kyuubi thanked him for. He slowly looked up at the tree, remembering that Kyuubi had called it a malorn tree. Whatever that meant. He looked back down to see Kyuubi sitting in front of him. What is the matter, young one? Naruto looked down, his hands beginning to shake. That man. I killed him. He was there, then my sword, then he was on me. I saw his eyes, they were alive, and then they were empty. Naruto buried his head, ashamed of the tears, and afraid at what he had just witnessed. Suddenly, he felt something butted against his arms. He looked up to see Kyuubi nosing his arm, trying to get him to lift up his head. The Kyuubi sat down, all his tails fanned out behind him. You feel horrible for taking his life, yes. As Naruto nodded, Kyuubi just smiled. What you are feeling is normal. You are a boy who was forced to take another person's life to protect your own and others. In truth, no child should ever have to experience that. It is one of the sad truths of this new world though. Arda has changed. He sighed as he moved next to Naruto. In this world, you are forced to train to fight, to aid, and protect your village. You must learn to kill at an early age. In truth, this would be considered a monstrosity by those who once dwelled in these lands. But now, it seems to be a necessity. Naruto kept looking at his hands until Kyuubi covered them with two of his tails. He looked up at Kyuubi. There is something I want for you to think about. What would have happened if he had escaped and lived to rob someone else? Then another person would suffer. I have a saying for you. When you draw your weapon, do not think about who you are killing, but rather, who you are letting live another day. If you take life, you should only do it in the defense of those who cannot protect themselves. Naruto looked down for a moment and slowly nodded. I think I understand. If I'm going to protect everyone I care about, if I'm going to protect my home, I must be ready to make sacrifices, whether it be my life or the innocence of childhood. Kyuubi slowly nodded, and by doing so, you gain a strength far greater than any. You gain a will to keep going, and to give everything to protect others. Naruto nodded. The will of fire. What Oji-san keeps talking about. Kyuubi looked at him for a moment, then began chuckling. I don't believe it. So, the one who saved me took my words to heart and taught it to others. When Naruto looked at him in confusion, he explained. When I first found Madara, he used the abilities granted to him by Morgoth to place me under a spell and attack the one you know as the Shodai Hokage. He released me, and I thanked him. In him, I saw a shadow of flame in his spirit, and as I left, I told him that he should let the imperishable will of fire be his guide. Apparently, he did so. So, you created the will of fire. That is messed up, Naruto said, his smile returning. He and Kyuubi joked and laughed for a while. In reality, Naruto slowly opened his eyes. He found himself in a room that seemed to have curved walls and a ceiling made out of wood. He slowly sat up from the bed he was on, and a wet washcloth fell into his lap. He looked around and noticed a tray with what seemed to be soup, bread, and a mug. He slowly pulled the mug over and saw it was filled with water. He drank and ate the soup, which was warm, savory, and seemed to have a mixture of vegetables and what tasted like rabbit meat. He was disappointed it wasn't ramen, but after a month of eating Elroth's cooking, he was getting used to not having it all the time. There was a creaking noise as the round door into his room opened. Elroth came in and smiled at the sight of Naruto up and eating. Glad to see you're awake. How are you feeling? Naruto sighed as he put the empty tray aside. Better, I'm all right. Elroth sighed as he pulled a small chair over and slowly sat in it so as not to break it. He looked Naruto over. Are you sure you're okay? I mean, you were in shock for almost 3 days, and 3 days. It didn't feel that long with Kyuubi. Well, who knows how the mind works? Naruto smiled before he looked around. Where are we? Elroth smiled. At the White Tower. In truth, we are in the small town the hobbits built around the tower. Now that you're awake, we can begin training again. Naruto nodded as he silently renewed his vow. I'll grow stronger. Then I can protect my home and everyone in it. 1 year, 5 months later, the midday sun glowed warmly down on those below it. The peaceful sounds of nature filled the air with the occasional grunt of a person at work, or the sound of a pony-drawn carriage. The small community of the Fairbairns bustled with the daily work. The pride of the community was a great, golden leaf tree. A Malorn tree, it had been planted by Samwise Gamgee, the Fairbairns' ancestor, after the Great War of the Ring. With the nourishment of the carefree spirits of the hobbits around it, it had grown into a magnificent specimen, and perhaps the only one left in existence. Beneath this tree sat a blonde-haired boy who was 10, almost 11 years of age. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, as he now called himself, was intently reading the book in his hands. The words were written in a strange language that was unknown to anyone in Konoha or the elemental nations. But Naruto read it with ease. He stopped to look up at the midday sun and sighed as he closed the book. He stood up, stretching, before turning to look at the 3 white towers that stood high above everything else around them. The boy had changed physically, since his training had truly now wore robes similar to Gandalf's, except his were green, like the colors of the leaves of a forest. He had grown considerable since he was now living on a healthy diet and because of his constant training with Elroth. And the weight seals he wore, his body had become lean muscle. His hair was still blonde and spiky, nothing could change that. The 3 whisker marks on each cheek still were prominent on his face, but his blue eyes had changed. Once they were hyper and crackled like lightning with energy. Now they were calm, deep, and showed wisdom and knowledge beyond their years. But there was also mischief in those eyes, mischief that never died, and had increased, as he and several of the younger hobbit teens had spent time pranking some of the stuffy elders of the village. He placed the book into the bag at his side and headed off, trudging back to the White Tower, which rose high above the town and its 2 under towers. He smiled as he looked around the town. In his time spent here, the boy had come to terms with most of his life. He accepted that Kyuubi was in him, and nothing would change that. He had accepted that his father had to do what he needed to do. And he accepted that most of the people in the village struck out at him because of grief. Some did it in hatred and anger, but most because of lost loved ones. A shout shook him from his thoughts as a hobbit approached. Naruto smiled as he recognized her, Lily Fairbairn. Amongst the hobbit community, she was an oddity. Most of the female hobbits took over domestic occupations, taking care of their homes, or serving ale at the local tavern. But Lily was different. She had a warrior spirit, much like the one Samwise showed upon his return to the Shire. Some even said Lily was a spitting image of what Sam would be like if he had been born a girl instead. Currently, she wore a leather skirt, a white chemise shirt, and a brown bodice, all meant for the wear and tear of woodland travel. Her long, curly brown hair was unadorned, and her blue eyes flashed with joy and mischief. She smiled as she joined Naruto. "Hey, there you are. Here I am. What's going on?" Lily smiled as she pointed over at a nearby table, where an older hobbit was preparing to sit down. Just as he had sat down on his chair, it gave out, causing him to sprawl on the ground. Both Naruto and Lily covered their laughs until they were far enough away before bursting out in laughter. Naruto shook his head. "I take it that was for the comment he made at the tavern 2 nights ago." The old hobbit, by the name of Kotman, had made a rather derogatory remark about Lily. How she was loose in the head, wandering around with the wizards. Lily just smiled. "I have no idea what you're talking about. So, you want to go practice on your aim?" "Last I checked, I was ahead, 42 to 38. Naruto shook his head. "It's 41 to 40, and I wish, but I need to go see Gandalf sensei. He told me that he had something important to tell me at 1 o'clock. And judging by the sun, it's almost time." Lily nodded. "Okay, maybe later then." She smiled and headed off, while Naruto just smiled. He remembered the first time he had run into Lily. Flashback. Naruto stood in an open field, staring at several targets. Elroth had shown him the basics of knife throwing, and set Naruto to practice with kunai they had bought a week into their travels from Konoha. Now, he threw one of his kunai at the target, but it just bounced off. He sighed, as this was his 10th try, and they all did the same. He turned to grab another, only to see a girl approaching. Naruto had been surprised when he had first seen the hobbits, since all of the adults and teens were his height. Now he was used to it, and he looked her over. Judging from her height, build, and facial features, she was probably in her late teens or early 20s. The hobbits had their own age system, but it baffled Naruto. She smiled at him, looking over what he had been doing. "Having trouble?" He nodded, and her smile grew wider. "Maybe I can help." She pulled a knife from the belt around her waist and flung it at one of the targets with relative ease. It nailed the bullseye almost dead center. Naruto just stared in amazement as she went over and pulled the knife out. "The problem is you're letting the knife rotate too much when you throw it. It's striking at an angle and bouncing off. Try and hold your wrist more rigid, and the knife won't twirl as bad. Or you can throw it just straight too." Naruto slowly nodded and did as she suggested. He threw another knife, and it hit the middle set of rings and stuck. He tried throwing the kunai straight, and this one came closer to the center. Naruto smiled happily as he pulled the kunai out. "Thanks, my name's Naruto. I'm Lily." Flashback ends. After that, a friendship had formed. She came around and helped him with his aim and talked to him whenever he had free time. She also joined him in some of his training with Elroth, as she was eager to learn some of the stealth and tracking skills of the famed Dunedain Rangers. Eventually, she and Naruto had formed a friendly, brotherly sisterly relationship. He passed through the small town, which had been built in the shadow of the 3 towers. Naruto stopped to examine their majesty. The towers were arrayed so that the 2 smaller towers were on either side of the main one and more westward. The main tower, called Elrysterion, stood higher than the other two. Naruto approached one of the two under towers. This one contained many of the weapons and armor of the Great War of the Third Age. They had been gathered together and placed in the tower during the Fourth Age of Middle-earth. Among the treasures was the armor of Peregrine Took, one of Frodo and Sam's hobbit companions on their quest to destroy the One Ring. He entered into the cool hallways of the tower and made his way to the room that Gandalf had been using for his own quarters. Naruto entered to see the wizard poring over a scroll written in what Naruto now recognized as the Dwarvish language. Gandalf smiled as he looked up at Naruto. "Ah, welcome my boy. Sit, sit." He indicated a chair while he rolled the scroll back up. Naruto sat down as Gandalf looked him over. He was indeed amazed at the progress the boy had made. When they had arrived, he was afraid that they would be pushing the limits of their available time in order to get Naruto covered in the basics of what he had needed to know. But the boy had proven them wrong. With the use of shadow clones and his own determination, the boy had learned the languages of Elf, Dwarf, and even the dark languages of Mordor. Once he had begun to learn, it seemed he had a ravenous hunger for knowledge. Every day, at least 50 to 100 shadow clones were seen reading and studying books, scrolls, and maps. Of course, the boy was even more impressive in his other training. Under Elroth's tutelage, and with the help of Lily and a few other hobbits, Naruto's stealth, tracking, and throwing skills were all very good. And when using chakra, the boy almost gave Elroth a run for his money in stealth and tracking. He assumed the boy did well in his ninja skills, for he had no comparison. Huon had assured him that for his age, Naruto was quite skilled. Currently, he was working on one of his father's jutsu, something called the Rasengan. It turns out that the scroll his father left him held more than just mementos. Inside had been the instructions and tools for 2 jutsus, as well as notes and possible ideas to improve upon them. But where the boy really did seem to shine was in the use of magic. When they had begun his training, Gandalf had started Naruto with the construction of a staff with which to channel his magic. Naruto had gone out and returned with a long branch of a tree. The bark of the wood was a dull brown red and was about 1.5 feet taller than Naruto's current height. Gandalf worried about the staff size until Naruto explained an idea Kyuubi had. Flashback. Kyuubi thought that perhaps there might be a way to up the power of the staff and make it more useful against other ninjas. Also, the seals will cause the staff to change size to better suit my current height, Naruto said as he began to paint a number of seals on the long branch. After he finished the last one and inspected each, he slowly placed the branch on a special seal on the ground. Then he began chanting the words Gandalf had taught him in order to enchant the wood into becoming his staff. At the same time, he began channeling his chakra, and as he said the last word, he placed his hands on the branch. He channeled both his magic and chakra into the staff. There was a blinding flash, causing Gandalf and Elroth to throw up their hands to shield their eyes. When the light cleared, they lowered their hands, only to gape at what they saw. The branch had changed, becoming shorter till it matched Naruto in height. The head of the staff was shaped like a fox head with an open mouth. The seals gave the staff a powerful look as they slightly glowed with the energy stored in them to strengthen the staff. The staff almost seemed to glow with the energy running through it. Naruto stood there, admiring his new tool, before he felt the wave of exhaustion hit him. He leaned against it until Elroth caught him. Naruto nodded faintly before falling unconscious. Flashback ends. Gandalf-sensei, is everything okay? Gandalf was shaken from his thoughts before he smiled at Naruto. Everything is fine, but I thought I ought to tell you. Your training here is complete. Naruto's eyes widened. Ah, really? Indeed. You have learned everything that you needed to from here, and more than I expected. I thought we would be pushing the limits of the time we have, but you astonished me with your thirst for knowledge. Now, we have one final stage of training. Naruto sat forward eagerly as Gandalf explained. There are 4 locations I wish to visit and show to you before you return home to Konoha. The first is a rumor I have been hearing. You read up on the kingdom of Rohan and know that it once was in the land you call Wind Country. Yes, I have heard rumors that the descendants of Rohan may have moved west, close to where we are. It would be an excellent idea to contact them, as they could be a valuable asset for the future. Naruto's eyes were wide. From everything he had read, the warriors of Rohan were a force to be reckoned with. He nodded as Gandalf continued. Next, we shall travel to the woods of Eregion, where the great elf smith masters forged weapons. There may be some items there that can be of use to you or any of your allies. If the map you have supplied me with is correct, it now lies in the country of Rain. Then we shall travel to Wine Country, where the ruins of Helm's Deep will hopefully lead us to Aglarond. Here we will find the dwarf home that was created by Gimli, son of Gloin. It will also be a place that could supply a great deal of mithril should the need arise. And lastly, we will search for the ruins of Minas Tirith, where we will recover more of your inheritance. Naruto's curiosity was perked at Gandalf's last statement. Inheritance? Yes, from your ancestor Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Naruto's face registered the surprise. But what could that inheritance be? Not the kingdom of Gondor, for its time has passed. Gandalf shook his head. No, Naruto. Something else. Something that will greatly benefit you. But enough. Go and pack. Tomorrow, we set out on our last journey. Naruto slowly nodded as he got up and left. He headed to his own room, stopping as he realized what this meant. Lily. He thought sadly of his friend and not being with her. He sighed as he entered his room. His staff leaned against a wall, with his short sword next to it. The room had books, scrolls, and pieces of paper scattered everywhere. He pulled out his pack and began packing away his sets of robes and notes he had made while studying. All in all, it took him half an hour to pack and straighten the room that had been his home for the past 17 months. He placed the pack next to his staff, then left to find Lily to say goodbye. He found her near a small stream, which she had told him was her favorite spot. She looked up and smiled at him, waving. He came over and sat down next to her, and she immediately noticed his melancholy mood. What's wrong? Naruto sighed as he tossed a rock into the water. Gandalf-sensei told me we're done here. Tomorrow, we're heading out to finish my travels, gather a few items and weapons, and then I'm going back to Konoha. Lily looked down, her own joy fading. Oh, I see. Naruto fell back on the grass, looking up at the sky above. I don't know. I know I need to go back home, and there are a few people who I want to see again. But I don't want to leave you. You're like the big sister I never had. And you're like the brother I always wished for. She fell back too and looked up at the sky. Then she turned to look at him. I could always go with you. Naruto immediately looked at her as she continued. I don't really have any ties here, and I want adventure. I want to go and see the world around this place. I want to see some of the things I've read about or that you've told me. Naruto sat up, thinking, Lily, I can definitely say I would love for you to come. But you have to realize the world is dangerous. In my life, there will always be danger. Danger that you may not be able to deal with. Lily sat up too. I know. All these ninjas and their jutsus. I've seen what you can do. But I really think I can help. Please, Naruto, let me come with you. Naruto just looked at her before smiling and hugging her close. I can't say no. Thank you, Ni-chan. Ni-chan. Or right, the sister thing. Lily and Naruto burst out laughing before heading to her home. Lily lived alone, as her parents had died during a bandit raid shortly after she was born. They quickly packed everything that she needed and items of a personal value before they headed to the tower. They stopped in the middle of the town square, and Lily quickly stepped onto a box. Everyone, I have something to say. All the hobbits present turned and gathered around as Lily smiled at them. I've decided that I'm going to join Naruto and go live in Konoha. So, my house and everything currently in it is up for grabs. All the hobbits just stared at her for several moments. Then, there was a stampede as they rushed in the direction of her home to claim the free items. Naruto stood there with a huge sweat drop while Lily just burst out laughing. Then she turned to Naruto as she got her mirth under control. Thank you, Naruto. This has been something I've always dreamed of. Naruto smiled as he hugged her. Thank you, Lily. With you by my side, I really think the adventures ahead will be easier to deal with. With that, the two of them headed to the towers to wait for tomorrow. Konoha, 5 months later. Hiruzen Sarutobi looked over Konoha, feeling mixed feelings right now. On the one hand, he was happy. In a month's time, Naruto would be returning to Konoha. Sarutobi couldn't wait to see his unofficial adopted grandson. But at the same time, he was dreading Naruto's return. The Council of Konoha had made things difficult for Sarutobi when they found out Naruto had left. Flashback. Sarutobi sighed as he looked over the bickering council members. Most were the clan heads of the greatest shinobi clans of Konoha: Shibuya Burame, Shikaku Nara, Inoichi Yamanaka, Chusa Akamichi, Hayashi Hyuga, and Tsuman Yuzuka. Also, several civilians who represented the various industries and guilds were on the council. Finally, Koharu Udatane, Hamura Mitakato, and Danzu, 3 elders who had been ninja alongside the Sandame, were his advisors and village elders. One of the civilians stood up in rage. The demon brat has left Konoha. He must be hunted down and killed before he comes back to destroy us. Several of the other civilians roared in agreement. Soon growled at them in anger. The boy is a hero, not a demon. Hokage-sama has told us how the Yondaime wanted him to be seen as a hero, and yet you spit upon his memory every time you mistreat the boy. The civilian looked at her in disgust. That thing is not human. Why should we view it as a hero? Danzu raised his one good arm before slowly standing up. The man's right eye and what was left of his right arm were covered in bandages, and the scars on his face spoke of the battles he had seen. He looked around with his one good eye before speaking. I do agree, he should be brought back, but he should be given to me so that the demon might be tamed and made into a proper weapon. There was mixed reactions, as some civilians agreed, while some others yelled he should be killed. Sum yelled in protest, as her clan had been ever loyal to the hokage and village, and had chosen to honor the yondame's wish. Sarutobi finally held a hand up, and everyone quieted. He looked over all of them, and then finally spoke. There will be no one sent to retrieve the boy. He left on a training trip, with a person who can help him harness and control the power given to him. When he returns, I can assure you that not only will Naruto not be a threat to Konoha, but he will be a great asset. Koharu looked at Sarutobi before sighing. I hope you are right, Hokage-sama. To be sure, the boy will be brought before us, and we shall determine if he is a threat or not when he returns. Flashback ends. Sarutobi sighed as he turned and watched the shadow clones working on the paperwork. I can't believe that I never realized this before. If I hadn't looked over the shadow clone jutsu to give to Naruto, I never would have realized it. Thank you, Naruto. Now please, come back safely. Meanwhile, at the academy, a certain lavender-eyed girl sighed unhappily as she sat alone at lunchtime. Hinata Hyuga looked down at her bento box, idly picking at the food she had prepared herself. It's almost been 2 years. I wonder where Naruto-kun went. I really wish he was here right now. When he was around, things always seemed so bright and happy. Hinata sighed again before packing the bento box away and heading back inside. Little did she realize, the person on her mind was not that far away. A few dozen miles away from Konoha, 4 figures moved through the forest of the Land of Fire, heading towards what should be the ruins of Minas Tirith. Elroth moved stealthily through the trees, keeping his eyes open for bandits and other enemies. He chanced a glance back at the others, smiling as he watched Lily and Naruto chatting happily. He remembered how surprised he and Gandalf had been when she had joined them, but Gandalf had accepted it, and Lily had joined them. She now wore a short, rough woolen cloak, which was a mixture of green and gray. When they had managed to track down and find the descendants of Rohan, who were now several scattered groups, she had been presented with the cloak for her travels. She also wore an elvish short sword at her side. That had been something that they had found in the ruins of one of the forges of VERYYYY. Most of the trees of the great forests had been cleared away, leaving the ruins open to scavengers and looters. But amidst the rubble, they had managed to procure a few items. Lily had taken a short sword, similar in design to the sword Sting, once wielded by Bilbo, and later Frodo Baggins. She had also gotten a curved knife, which she had quickly proven she was quite skilled with at both close quarters and throwing. Naruto had also found a new weapon. Since he was growing, the short sword he had once wielded was growing to small. In a region, he had found a broadsword that might have been crafted for one of the men of the north, who had befriended the elves. It was beautifully crafted, the blade actually forged from mithril itself. After training hard to be accustomed to the length and weight of his new weapon, he had quickly proven to be a terror in battle, especially when combined with his staff. Elroth looked back ahead, quickly checking around to make sure there were no threats nearby. He didn't want a repeat of what had happened in the glittering caves. Flashback. They had found the ruins of what was once Helm's Deep, the great fortress that had served Rohan in times of war. After the destruction of the ring and the end of the Great War, Gimli had returned to the glittering caves that lay in the mountains behind Helm's Deep, and with dwarves from the Lonely Mountain, they had established a new dwarven city in the caves. Now, they were left abandoned. Gandalf slowly entered first, leading the group. He stopped to examine the doors that had once blocked access to unfriendly people. The stone doors had been destroyed, demolished by an explosion. Gandalf turned to the others. Be careful, we may not be alone here. With that, Elroth, Naruto, and Lily had all drawn their swords as they entered. Inside, Naruto and Lily both gasped. The walls of the cave glistened with ores and minerals untouched. Proud dwarf statues and runes covered the walls. Passages led off to other rooms and hallways. Gandalf looked over a set of runes, then pointed to one passage. That will lead to the mines where mithril and other metals were found. And that passage will lead to the armory and libraries. We should head that way. They headed down the passage, only for Elroth to stop Gandalf, as a sixth sense warned him of a trap. Suddenly, over a dozen bandits appeared. You shouldn't have come here. Get them. The bandits charged. The 4 of them formed a square, preparing for combat. One bandit swung his axe down at Lily, only for her to dodge to the side and jump on the man. Her newly acquired sword pierced the man in the chest, and he fell, gurgling. She stared at him for a moment before snapping out of it and moving to fight one of the two bandits ganged up against Naruto. Gandalf thrust his staff outwards, and an invisible force threw a few of the bandits against a wall of the cave, where several things broke. And those things were not the stone and rock of the cave. Elroth blocked an huge cleaving sword with his sword, before plunging his knife deep into the man's belly. He twirled, blocking an attack with both weapons, before kicking the bandit's weapon away and slashing across the man's throat. Naruto blocked an attack with his sword and leveled his staff at the weapon's owner. "Narrow," he said, and flames leapt from his staff, knocking the man back as his clothes caught on fire. Suddenly, Lily cried out as one of the bandits knocked her out with the pole of his spear. But just as he was about to finish her off, Naruto appeared, his face contorted in rage. He blocked with his sword while he lowered his staff until the fox head, which was pulsing with energy, was pointed at the man's chest. The man was blown back by the pulsing energy and knocked through a wall. At the sight of what the boy had done, the few remaining bandits fled, heading for the exit of the cave. Naruto knelt down next to Lily and began looking her over. He glanced up at Gandalf and Elroth. "She'll be fine. She just needs rest." Flashback ends. Elroth again cursed his inability to have noticed the signs of the bandits before they had entered the ambush. But in the end, it worked out. They had gone through the library and armory, and left with several tomes that spoke of the mines, and a few dwarvish weapons, which now resided in a storage scroll that the hokage had given Naruto. Now, they were headed to the final destination for Naruto's training. Gandalf finally stopped them as they arrived in a wide field. In the distance, they could see a few mountains, which were all that was left of the once great white mountains. And nestled against these mountains was a large ruin. Naruto gaped in amazement as he looked at the ruin. At one time, the city had been crafted of white stone. From what Gandalf had told him, the city had been layered into 7 sections, each surrounded by a wall. Now, most of the upper city and walls were in ruin, as was the main wall surrounding the city. What looked like a tall, thin tower lay broken amidst the wall. Gandalf slowly lowered his head. It is sad to see the white city in such a state. At one time, it was truly beautiful. But come, there will be time for memories later. Indeed, do not expect to be able to rest from my training, young one. Naruto sighed, as Kyuubi reminded him of the daily training he had begun now that they had left the White Tower. Kyuubi had taken time to examine the seal holding him, and told Naruto what he had discovered. The seal had been created with the intent of containing Kyuubi, until the last of its chakra had been siphoned off, and Kyuubi died. However, since Huon was a being of magic, and magic worked differently than chakra, there was an interesting side effect. It turned out that Kyuubi could flood Naruto's chakra coils with magic. This gave Naruto an incredible boost in strength, speed, reflexes, and stamina. However, Naruto would be unable to perform any magic during the time he was using the boost. Also, the power had to be controlled. If Kyuubi flooded Naruto's chakra system with more magic than he could control, he would go into a primal rage and destroy everything in his path. Currently, Naruto could control up to 2/10 of Kyuubi's overall power flooding through him. The first 10th of power surrounded Naruto in an aura of red energy. Most shinobi would mistaken it for chakra. Naruto's eyes would become red with slitted black pupils, while his canine teeth and nails grew longer, and his whisker marks became more prominent. 2/10 of his power created an image of a fox around Naruto, with a tail. They approached the wall, and passed by a 30-foot-high gate, with an emblem of the White Tree of Gondor in the middle of it. Gandalf nodded at it. That gate was made to replace the one destroyed in the siege of Minas Tirith during the Great War. It was made of mithril by Gimli. They passed through an opening in the wall and stepped into the ruined White City. Naruto and Lily looked around in amazement at the ruined and abandoned buildings. Naruto imagined what the city would have been like in its prime, and came to a sad conclusion. Men have truly faltered. Once, we built great cities like this, cities of beauty and strength. Now, cities like Konoha and Iwa are just places of money and war. Such is the way of men. The shorter lives do not give them time to understand what is truly important in life, Gandalf said as he led them along the streets and upwards. They passed through the levels of Minas Tirith, sometimes having to take long detours to get past rubble in their path. Eventually, they reached the 7th level, where the citadel of the White City stood. Gandalf led them into the ruined throne room before stopping. He pointed Naruto towards the throne. "You alone must figure out what happens next," Gandalf said as Naruto approached the throne, seated on the raised steps. He slowly followed them up and stared at the throne of his forefathers. He examined the throne before noticing a small inscription on one of the sides of the throne, written in Elvish. "A person's destiny is affected by their Naruto read it slowly before looking over the throne. Why would that be here? Why would one destined to be king say that their destiny is affected by something? He sat on the steps as he pondered the question. From what I've seen or read, one would think that destiny is set. And yet, who is to say destiny is set? It was not destiny that made my father Hokage. It was his. That's it. Naruto turned back to the throne and opened his mouth silmy. He spoke. Suddenly, there was a rumbling, and the throne was raised up, revealing a passageway underneath. Naruto looked at it, then turned back to the others. Elroth had a look of awe and reverence. Lily was amazed, and Gandalf smiled and nodded. Naruto turned and entered. Inside was dark, so Naruto placed a light crystal into the mouth of the fox head of his staff. He gently breathed on it, and it lit up, lighting the way. Naruto followed the passageway down, around twists and bends, for what seemed like an eternity until it opened up. He entered the room and stopped, gaping in amazement. The room was lined with lanterns that gave off a red glow, lighting the room. Other than that, the walls were bare. The center of the room was dominated by a plinth, on which lay a sword in its sheath. The scabbard of the sword was truly a wonder. Naruto recognized elvish runes along the side, naming the sword and its lineage and jewels. Angerol, he spoke softly, but as he reached out, a voice stopped him. Who are you that comes seeking this blade? Naruto turned, a hand on the hilt of his own sword. He saw nothing, but a vague mist that had appeared. Slowly, the mist took shape, becoming the outline of a man. Naruto kept his grip on his sword. I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Minato Namikaze. A good name. In the modern language of men, your name means maelstrom, whirlpool, and wind and waves. Slowly details of the figure appeared. He was a man who appeared to be in his 30s or 40s. He had shoulder-length hair and a trimmed beard. He wore a tunic of dark blue material, decorated with the emblem of the white tree. Under it, Naruto could see a chainmail shirt over a red shirt. He also had pants of the same color as his tunic, and wore bracers that were made of steel so bright it looked like silver. He approached Naruto and stood next to the plinth. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Naruto's eyes widened. Why, you're Aragorn? The spirit nodded. I am, and you are of my line. I have watched my descendants, waiting for the one who would have need of my sword when it was buried here. The spirit of Aragorn turned and picked the sword up before turning to Naruto. Before you may claim this blade, tell me, for what purpose will you wield it? Naruto looked at the sword, then at Aragorn, before answering. I only seek the means to protect my home and those I care about. Even if it may cost me my life, I will defend those precious to me. Aragorn nodded. Then you are worthy to wield this sword. Take it, and may it serve you well. With that, Aragorn held the sword out. Naruto took it and examined the sheathed blade before gripping the hilt. With a quick movement, the blade was unsheathed, and he held it in a warrior's salute as he examined the sword itself. The blade shone in the red light, reflecting the light off its surface. The blade bore etched emblems of the sun and crescent moon, with 7 stars in between them. The hilt below the crossguard was wrapped in black leather in a one-handed grip. Then the rest of the hilt was metal, sweeping outwards at the pommel stone. Naruto admired the blade before sheathing it. He then noticed something. It's a little, well, big, he said. Aragorn chuckled. It is. You still need to grow into the blade. But don't let that stop you. With that, Aragorn turned to the exit. It's time then. The Luvetter allowed me to come here when I needed to, but now I must go. He turned back to Naruto as he slowly faded away. I know you will not disappoint me. Goodbye, Naruto, and good luck. Naruto nodded as his ancestor vanished. He looked at the sheathed blade in his hand before pulling out his storage scroll. He opened it and then sealed the sword away in its own special seal. In the throne room, Lily was beginning to worry. Naruto had been gone for over an hour. She turned to Elroth and Gandalf, who watched the passage under the throne intently. Suddenly, there was the sounds of footsteps on steps, and then Naruto appeared. He turned and watched as the throne descended back into place. Before turning to the others, he slowly walked down the steps and then stopped in front of them, the storage scroll still in his hand. Gandalf nodded. It is done. They spent the night in rooms that had survived the slow decay of time. As morning came, they exited Minas Tirith. Gandalf stopped there and turned to them. Unfortunately, this is where we must part ways. I must return to Valinor. Naruto just nodded. Kyuubi told me. Your time here has ended, your task complete. Gandalf smiled sadly. I am sorry. I wish I could stay to help guide you, but I must return home. Naruto smiled before hugging Gandalf. Thank you for everything. Gandalf hugged the boy back before pulling back. He turned to Elroth. Your task is yet to be complete. You must help Naruto. Guard him against the evils that will come. And you, my young friend? Gandalf now turned to Lily. You must be there for him, as a friend and sister. Lily nodded. I will. Gandalf turned, looking past the White City. I sense great things ahead for all of you. Be safe. Then, he started off. The trio watched the wizard as he headed on his way, humming an old tune. Naruto just nodded before turning away back towards Konoha. It's time to go home. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Leaf Ranger on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.